Tell us a little bit about, I'll start with an easy one. I know I have a mandate to ask difficult questions. In past interviews, you've often cited Immanuel Kant, but if you ask me about the critique of pure reason, I'm not going to answer. I'm sorry, I just got to say that ahead of time. Tell us a little bit about how BMW approaches the arts patronage that it does. You've been there for a number of years now, pushing ahead in quite interesting ways.
I think what the BMW Group is striving for is not so much a transaction, which is why we shy away from the word sponsorship, because we think of it as more of a transaction and not, or an interaction, not so much a transaction. So sponsorship would just mean to fork over money from A to B, whereas we want to create real formats like projects that don't make us interchangeable when it comes to what it is that companies can do for culture.
Can we get the echo to stop on the mic? So what are some examples of that? You were telling me about a recent project where there's a quite interesting young artist. What's it, Samson Young? What's that project about? Why did you want to support that one?
Well, whatever we do, we really want, we honor the creative freedom of the artist, which I think is crucial. And it's the only way that companies can act in an authentic and trustworthy way within the cultural realm. Our core business is cars, so we rely on the opinions of others. I never join a jury where artists are, for example, being picked to create a BMW art car, or as in the latest initiative, a joint initiative together with Art Basel, Max Bigler was here earlier, we could have thrown the thousandth prize for young emerging artists onto the market, which is basically just is good for us. It's the BMW prize or whatnot, and it's good for the artists, of course. There's some monetary component involved, but we thought that it might be a good idea to create something like the BMW Art Journey, which doesn't mean they have to have a driver's license, which doesn't mean they have to drive around in Beamers. It just means that artists sometimes they don't have the time or the budget to leave their studios and encounter, a dialogue with many nations and nationalities. So the first artist who got awarded was a young artist, Hong Kong-based artist by the name of Samson Young. He got his PhD in musical composition at Princeton University, so he's a very international human being. And he was looking at the relationship between conflict and bells. He was recording iconic bells all over the place, which means basically it's interesting because the loudest sounds that human beings could make prior to the Industrial Revolution was bells and cannons. And of course, in times of war, bells are being melted down to create cannons, and in times of peace, cannons are being melted down to create bells. So he knew about the intricate dialogues going on in many countries. He went to 5 continents. For example, in Cologne we have a huge cathedral there, and it's always about how loud is that bell really chiming. And we have a discussion, of course, where there are many mosques being built in Germany now, that how high can the steeple of the mosque be, how loud can the muezzin actually sing or the prayer start. And he was recording the sound of the big church bell of the Cologne Cathedral on the premises of where the mosque in Cologne will go up. He was thinking of how loud will that Catholic bell ring on that site of the future mosque. And that is interesting intricacies that all come up with this project that we are very happy to be able to put our weight behind.
And is that sounds like a really fascinating project. Is that something that people will be able to see that will appear in a particular space, or it just supports the work of that one artist and he has to figure out where to have his work shown or listened to?
No, since we're also talking about the technology. I mean, he did, of course, a blog. We have a website for that. Many were following him. He did all those sound files as he was also recording those bells, which you can listen to online. So, and thanks to Art Basel, and we heard about how many followers they have, and the followers that BMW has. It created a big momentum, and for people to just also listen to and participate. Has BMW's approach to supporting culture changed over the years? I feel like one of the first times that people might have, well, there were the art cars 40 years ago, but I remember the motorcycle exhibit at the Guggenheim in 1998, which was in some ways contentious. That was seen as, oh, we've turned the Guggenheim into a motorcycle showroom. But my colleague Michael Kimmelman reviewed it kind of favorably in the New York Times as a design show, and he said that this exhibit is also something where all the men who've been dragged to Monet shows will go to this as some kind of revenge. Well, I do think that, I mean, the motorcycle show was a big success. You know, it was like before, you know, design really was hitting it big in museums. You know, you had this motorcycle show, and it just so happened that Thomas Krenz was a big fan of motorcycles himself, and he was riding BMW motorcycles. Out of 180 motorcycles that were presented in the rotunda of the Guggenheim, I think only 4 were BMW motorcycles, so we were actually underrepresented. But, you know, the press, of course, is free to write whatever they want to do.
It was sponsored by BMW, though.
Pardon me?
It was sponsored by BMW.
Sponsor. I told you we are not mentioning that word. We're entering partnerships, cooperations, and all of that. So yes, I wasn't working there when the motorcycle show was happening, but it's still a very good show. You know, and you got bikers lining up all across, you know, the Upper East Side. When do you have that? You know, it wasn't the Hogs and Heifers. It was really the Guggenheim.
When Donald Trump is president. When Donald Trump is president, anything's possible.
To go back to your first part of the question, it's to go back to the first part of the question, yes, I think the way has changed in which companies are, you know, doing things with culture. Because the way that companies are being looked at has changed. You know, now it's no longer only about the shareholder, it's also about the stakeholders. It is, how does a company behave within a society that it is doing successful business in? You know, it's like, so that is important, and the corporate citizenship aspect of it has become important. So it's no longer about sponsoring, you know, sorry to say, but it's like not about throwing art at an exhibition that a curator wants to do, art and money at an opera production that an opera wants to do, and we do this, I think. We would like to think that, you know, the subtlety of our approach speaks of the sophistication of the company that is involved in this. If we were to emblazon our logo, which has a big name recognition, I would argue more so than any other logo of a museum, if we were to emblazon that on a red curtain before the opera starts to play, we would piss off, excuse my language, the same people that we're trying to reach who are going to the opera house.
Does that mean, however, that you as the person who helps oversee the cultural spending or funding of BMW, does that mean that you're pretty much involved in the process, in the artistic process of the artist that you're supporting, rather than, okay, here's some money, have an exhibit or do a performance?
Again, I do believe in the absolute creative freedom, you know, which is so important for anything, which is why I don't even sit on a jury. I give you one example. Before the art car that Jeff Koons was creating, there was Olafur Eliasson created an art car. It was actually, it could only be entered in a walk-in freezer, and he was working with an H2R car, which had achieved many records in terms of only being driven by hydrogen, alternative energy sources. But as he could do whatever he wanted to do with it, the first thing was he ripped out all the logos of the car. You know, he encased it in stainless steel structures, and then there were thousands of icicles hanging from, you know, it was a statement about global warming, whatever you make of it. And yes, there are discussions within the company because, yeah, designers and engineers, they love the logo. They live for that, you know, they are very proud of the achievements of this brand, and so am I. But there's artistic freedom. And the New York Times ran a one-page article about Olafur Eliasson's car, and they said, and that was in 2007, that's the best advertisement BMW has towards its sustainable future. So we were way out of our comfort zone, but at the same time, it was recognized that, you know, what we do isn't only there to market our cars, but it's about corporate citizenship, and it's about an authentic relationship with artists from which we then also can learn. Olafur Eliasson, as an integral part of his art car project, created a book where he asked sociologists, psychologists, future city planners about the future of the automobile in megacities. And our chief designer made this mandatory reading for his 500 designers at BMW. So yes, when I talk about interaction instead of transaction, there's also a dialogue going on.
And you were pretty early in doing that with Elias, and he's a really interesting artist who has a lot of, he's very engagé in ways that are really interesting and important, I think. Other examples of projects in the last couple of years that BMW has been involved with that you think have really advanced culture in interesting ways?
Each and every one. I mean, we've been doing this for 50 years, and it's like hundreds of cultural initiatives worldwide. You know, it's just, I get 3,000 inquiries every year, you know, about can we do this, can we do that? And many of those are fantastic, and they come from all over the world, but you can only do so much. You know, at the end of the day, you're a car company, and that is your business, but you think of BMW, hopefully, and this, shouldn't be like shouldn't come across as an ad for the company that I'm working for. At the same time, of course, you want those values to be reflected, which, we think of BMW as a cultured brand. If we talk about the brand BMW, of course, Rolls-Royce and Mini are also involved, also in the arts, but they're doing different things. And innovation and dynamic things might come to your head, and that is what we want to strive for also in the arts. Be at the forefront of new developments.
Speaking of new developments, I feel I have to ask you, you're a German company. Germany is going through a quite interesting time since the summer when Chancellor Merkel decided to have 1 million refugees come to Germany, a country of about 90 million people. Is BMW doing anything in terms of the refugees who've arrived in Germany?
We just celebrated our 100th anniversary last week, and the shelf life of a successful international company is usually 50 years tops. There's one company that's still being traded on Wall Street, that was there when Wall Street got off the ground in the 1880s or whenever that was. So, and there was talk, there was of course a big festive act with like a lot of politicians, a lot of people from business and also culture, and we talked about how important it was in terms of diversity, in terms of intercultural exchange, which is nothing to strive for as a successful business company, but it is something that is at the core of a successful business company that does businesses worldwide. It's called BMW for Bavarian Motor Works, but that's one plant out of 30 that is based in Munich. The others are all over the place in the world. And yes, are we doing something? Yeah, we started of course, everybody. It's a joint effort. Everybody has to do something. So we created something late last year. A lot of the refugees were coming through Munich, and we were actually very proud of being called that, welcoming culture of Germany. If you think of, there was Hitler's city. He moved there in 1913, and it's just, I just yesterday had the discussion with Martin Roth, and we were talking about how we deal with that past and that legacy. And he said, while we don't bear any personal responsibility or guilt in this regard, it's this never again, I think, that is important to us. So it's important to the individuals, it's important to the companies, and of course we do our share. We created a program in terms of the refugees that would allow for at least 500 within the year to start a job training program at BMW. And they're very highly motivated, and it's great to see that happen, that we contribute to making them feel welcome and making them get a job within Germany.
I didn't know about that program. That must make a strong statement, and also, I don't know. It's a good statement, it seems.
I didn't know about it either, but I knew I was going to talk to the New York Times today, so I called a colleague and said, "What are we actually doing?" Because the question might be coming up.
It's always good to do your homework. I wonder if anybody in the audience has questions just about the act of about anything, sir, with the glasses in the third row back there.
Just a question. There's a lot of luxury brands that are doing these initiatives with emerging artists and sponsorships. What do you think about, is there any danger with, a lot of luxury brands now, it's almost like a must for them to do projects where they invite emerging artists or young artists, and it almost becomes a part of the brand. Is there any danger you see on that, or just
for the artist or for the company?
Well, for the artists.
Yeah, absolutely. Look at the overlap of the art market and the art world. They have basically become, almost the same thing, which wasn't like that. In New York in the 1910s, you had 20 galleries focusing on contemporary art. Now you have 1,000. What does that do to young artists? And if we say we are partnering with young artists, of course, or emerging artists, if companies say that, that of course means it costs less than working with established artists, and you do something great for younger people. But I don't not at all want to be cynical about this. I think that also artists will have to always think this through. Do I want to work with this company? Do I like, the ethics of this company as a global citizen? They shouldn't just go in there, for any sort of budgetary or monetary reward, but think about who they want to join and whether that is the right initiative for them.
Hasn't quite reached the point where artists are like sports stars who have, the different. Not quite, I think. There's another question here, sir. The microphone's coming. I can ask you about Marcel Duchamp afterwards.
I'd just be curious whether BMW has a similar approach like Mercedes or Deutsche Bank in having an own collection, an own arts collection?
First of all, it's a valid question. The thing is, when you look at the banks or the service industry, what they don't have is an image that you associate themselves with. So this would be the usual companies that are doing something in the arts because they got to fill that visual void that they don't have because you don't associate anything with them. Of course, when it comes to car companies, you would hopefully associate, a great car with BMW, for example. So we don't need to fill that visual void, which is why, actually, besides the BMW art cars, which were painted from Liechtenstein to Warhol to Koons, we don't have a collection. What we do is we buy works. Of course, we have many, many walls. It's 120,000 people worldwide living in offices. So we have many walls, but we engage with local academies. We buy works from them because we also want to do something for the community instead of just buying big works at auction. So no, we don't have a collection in terms of the collection that you might be asking about, but we want to do something for the neighborhood, and thus we have art on the wall by young artists that would still go to university at the time that we purchase their works.
I'm going to change gears for just 1 second, before ask more audience questions. You have a PhD in art history and have written several books on Marcel Duchamp, whose specter I feel like haunts today's panels, from Jeff Koons' art to Jeffrey talking about Duchamp going to Los Angeles. Can you just tell us a little bit about your thoughts on what Duchamp means for today? And also, I just want to say that I think, I could ask you a different question. You look terrified at the
That could go on
of
for
Marcel
hours,
Duchamp.
but it wouldn't be.
Well, it's interesting. It's like he's everywhere. He's everywhere these days.
Well, I give you just one quote, and I think that's important also in terms of the what we talk about. When we talk about emerging artists or what it is that cities can do for artists or the other way around, Duchamp was already, he was talking about quick art in the 60s that was only produced for being sold right away. He was although he was dealing in Brancusi sculptures, people that bought them made a good deal now, if we look at the numbers. But he was, going up against, the art market in certain shapes and forms, but at the same time, he said, there's the artistic community en masse, all those artists, and when we talk about them, we generalize. But he said there's the solitary explosion of an individual facing himself alone. And I love that quote, the solitary explosion of an individual facing himself alone. At the end of the day, it boils down to an artist working in his or her studio, making us see things or delving deeper inside of themselves, going to regions where we, as not artists, don't dare to go. And that is why art can open up. Even in Doha, looking at Chinese contemporary art yesterday, art can open up if art has a place, but it comes out of good art comes out of a real introspection that we can gather the scope and scale and the power of when we look at it. And I think that Duchamp is certainly also at the forefront of that. But as he is considered, one of the most intelligent artists of the 20th century, he's always being referred to because everybody, who's referring to Duchamp, looks not bad.
But everyone there. It just strikes me that so many artists are still really having a conversation with Duchamp more than other artists. I think. I think more artists are having a conversation with Duchamp today than perhaps they are having with other artists of the 20th century.
Well, I think also when it comes really to, he's when Duchamp is just you can learn a lot from Duchamp, but he's being now seen as, of course, he's the father of the ready-made, and he's the iconoclast. But when you read literature like from emerging Chinese artists, also from Turkish artists, and I pick up all these things because I'm so interested in the subject matter, precisely because he was going up against the Western canon, although you might still consider him to be part of that, certainly, but he was going up against all that what we conceive as great art, through the centuries. He's basically also the patron saint of those artists or those artistic communities or regions that are now, not elbowing their way in, but now they want to be heard as well, and they deserve to be heard. And, I'm also happy to see Duchamp on that side of the equation, of somebody who was, not giving hope, that would be too preposterous, but somebody who's worth looking into because he was going up against the same stuff.
And he didn't have a driver's license.
No, he had not. He did not have a driver's license. He was. His wives were driving him around, and he owned a Volkswagen. I'm
There.
free and happy to say, a little Beetle. Yeah.
There you go. Another question I believe we have in the front row here.
I'm going to do three sort of packaged in one. One, how does a PhD in art history get a job at BMW? Two, I'm curious as to where cultural engagement sits within the structure of BMW. Are you part of a CSR division or part of marketing, which is really a question of where your money comes from? And related to that question is, how do you measure your return on investment, cultural investment or engagement, internally within the company? Because I think it's still incredibly rare that actually a commercial company does the kind of support, particularly in Europe, that BMW does in the cultural sector.
Okay, the first one is like I just applied. I was in New York for 8 years, and then I thought it was time to go back to Germany, and then I just applied to like many, companies, museums, and I could have ended up anywhere. That's why I was so bad at negotiating, because I was just working. I mean, as a freelance writer and working for the late Harvard professor Stephen Jay Gould for a not-for-profit called Art Science Research Laboratory. So I was not good negotiating with BMW when I entered, because when they named the figures, I was like, what? I couldn't even, I didn't know that, you could make money, just studying humanities, and then I wish I could go back to that 12 years ago when I joined, because it could have, well, okay, so that was that. And it just so happened that this person who was doing this was actually leaving. And the second thing is, that's a valid question, because if you ever want sponsorship, now I said it, from a company, you look where it's located. It can be in a foundation, it can be a part of human resources, or it can be in marketing or corporate affairs. So within BMW structure, it is within it is reporting to the CEO, to the corporate affairs segment of the CEO, and of course we have also marketing involved in the arts. Let's say we're big partners and have been for some time with Art Basel, both in Basel, in Hong Kong, and in Miami, of course. That's where you want the product. That's where you want those VIPs to actually have a driving experience. Of course, we also come with content, BMW Art Journey, or we bring an art car along. But at the same time, that's where you want to be. If we did the same with like biennials, the Kochi Muziris Biennial in India, which we are partnering with, or the Berlin Biennial, in Berlin they'd probably smash our windows in, if we were to provide a shuttle service for the Berlin Biennial, which hasn't happened. I'm just saying that it could be. So there, our approach is a different one. We also put our weight behind a young curators workshop that brings together young curators from all over the world to gather and talk about curatorial aspects during the time of the Berlin Biennial. So
that's from marketing? That's the marketing budget?
No, that's what I mean.
Your budget.
That is the CSR approach, the corporate social responsibility approach, which is not connected to the car as such. And that's why I'm also happy to report it would be negligent, really, to say, well, how many cars did you sell with that? That is not the right question to ask. It's about, but don't get fooled. I mean, no company does these things for altruistic, philanthropic, or other reasons. It's done for the reputation and the visibility of the company. But at the same time, I don't have any KPIs within the company that values what it is, what I do. I mean, we do these things to generate, the media writes about what it is that we're doing. Others are happy with what it is that we're doing. We're not doing it, just like that. But we don't measure that in terms of sales, and it would not be the right approach, I think.
And you don't measure it in terms of the marketability of the artists in whose work you're you're supporting. I mean, you don't say like, oh, this artist, doesn't have enough of a market value, so we're not going to support the project.
No, and again, we don't pick the artists like the BMW Art
You have
Journey.
a jury.
It's great directors from all over the world. With the art car, the same thing. That they pick John Baldessari from the West Coast, male older gentleman, and a young Chinese female artist, Chao Fei, living in Beijing, was just, I mean, it's fantastic when you look at our markets. They're big in China, they're big in the US, but they were chosen by an international independent panel that could make that decision, and we weren't part of that.
Did you ever stop a project? Did you ever just say, oh, wait a second, we're not comfortable with where this artist is going?
You'd be the one to do the research, because I certainly would not tell you that.
I tried. Are there any other questions from the audience? Don't seem to be questions from the audience. I think it's really terrific that you took an art history PhD and went to work at a place like BMW, because I think that, we won't get into the talk about the crisis in the humanities and how it's quite difficult for many humanities PhDs to find jobs, but I think that there are terrific opportunities out there in the world, and for art historians as well. So I think
Beacon of hope.
you're a beacon of hope. Great. Thank you so much for this conversation.